Well, oh, Jackson, you got it. It's working. He takes care of everybody but his bride. So those of you that ate tonight know how good this was. Those of you that didn't, fried chicken's like the best food there ever was. It doesn't take any tools. It's really good and crunchy. You can eat a lot more of it than you think you can. And it's my view that we ought to just have it every week up here during the summer with that macaroni and cheese and the watermelon salad. So anyway, it was great. And I know that you guys are, after 2 weeks, are kind of tired of hearing my Trader Joe travails about the dill pickle popcorn, but so they keep tempting me. I go in and I just walk around and look for things in green packages. So, I showed you last week the seasoning. Well, I was in there a couple of days ago and I was looking for something in the frozen food, and dill pickle falafels. So I kind of feel like, well, it's whatever it is, chickpeas, so it's kind of good for you. And still has it. So if anybody's looking for another dill pickle thing, it's the dill pickle falafel at Trader Joe's. And before I give you to Nancy Turner, I just want to remind everybody, next week with Kathleen Kent, Richard said something last week, we're not going to be selling books because we won't have a bookseller here. If you have The Heretic's Daughter by her and you want to bring it, we'll have a table upstairs afterwards, and she's happy to sign anybody's book. So just remember that for next week. So we don't have anybody from the church tonight, so I'm going to turn this over to my friend Nancy Turner to introduce Mary Roberson, and we're, again, glad you're here. Yeah, go.
Thank you. Well, we're so glad to have all of you here tonight. I'm Nancy Turner, and I'm a member of Highland Park Methodist Church. I'm also a member of the Rejebian Book Review Committee. And this is Mary Roberson. She is our wonderful reviewer for tonight. And before we start, I just have a few questions that I want to ask her. Mary, where are you from?
I grew up in Orange, Texas, but I'm one of those Texans that I wasn't born here, but I got here as quick as I could. My mother was in Bogalusa, Louisiana, taking care of her mother, who was dying of cancer. And the morning her mother passed away, I was born that afternoon. So everything I have, I've had to write Bogalusa, Louisiana, instead of Orange, Texas.
Well, we're glad she made it to Texas as she could already. Now, tell us something about your education, your background, and your career.
I have a bachelor's from Baylor University and a master's from Texas Women's University. I was a school librarian for about 16 years, taught in the classroom before that, because did you know Texas requires you to have 3 years of classroom experience before you can be a librarian? Mm-hmm. So I did that. And then when I retired from that, I found this wonderful opportunity at Richland College, and I taught on campus, and I taught online, and I just retired from that recently. But I've had a wonderful time with both experiences in the library and in the classroom.
I think that's wonderful because I'm a librarian too. We have that in common. It's a wonderful field. And I know you traveled. You had a goal of?
All 50 states.
Have you made that goal?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Many of them multiple times.
How many of you have been to all 50 states? 1, 2.
See, other adventurers here.
3 people. Anybody in the balcony? Yeah. Remember balcony?
Wow.
We know you're up there. Yeah, we know you're
And
there.
and I did do some foreign countries, too, on 5 continents. I don't know the count of how many foreign countries, but a bunch.
And then tell us about your family. She's had a wonderful career now, but she's got another career.
Oh, yeah. I'm Nana. I have 3 grown sons who have blessed me with 8 grandchildren. And one of those is old enough and married long enough to bless me with 2 great grandchildren. So it's a really exciting thing to be Nana to such a lovely group of people. I
And
treasure
one
that.
son is here. Would you like to
Yes.
raise your hand? And we'll just say, hello, Eric. There's Eric right there. And one last question. We're really glad to have you here. I was the one who introduced her last year on Zoom, if any of you remember that, and I encouraged you to go and sneak into the freezer and get some chocolate chip cookies while you were watching her. But we don't have any chocolate chip cookies tonight. We had a wonderful meal instead. But so the question that I'm going to finish with is, what steered you into reviewing books? You traveled a lot, you were a mother or grandmother, you had a career as a librarian, but now you're reviewing books.
It's one of those serendipity things that you hear about, but you don't expect to happen to you. I was teaching history at Richland College, and every year, your dean has to come in and observe your classroom. And they critique you, give you ideas of things you could do better or things that you really, really got to do better. And so after the review, my dean was just so thoughtful. And, we talked about all her list of things that she had to go over. And then she said, I want you to go to the emeritus office before you leave this campus today. They need you. And I'm going, what is the emeritus office and what do they need me for? And what they needed me for was to go out and speak at retirement communities. They had a regular contract with a number of the communities. And the funny thing was, every time I went out and spoke at a retirement community, somebody asked me to come speak to their book club. And the next thing I knew, I was a book reviewer. It's wonderful. And I tell you, I love you people that like to hear book reviews.
Absolutely, we do. So that concludes my introduction of her. And we're so glad that you're here. And you can see on the screen what her review is, The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson. I've read the book. It's a great book. I'm looking forward to it. And so, before we start, I want you to give her first of all, a Highland Park clap, a Texas clap, a Rejebian book review clap, and welcome her. Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, the book that we're looking at today is Eric Larson's The Splendid and the Vile. Now, if you've read any of his other books, and he's had a number of bestsellers, you know that he is an incredible researcher. He goes to primary documents. He puts all of the fun details you wish you had known in the book. Now, I've got an hour. I'm not going to touch half of that book. I'm going to give you some stuff that I found really fun and that I think will make you want to read the book. Hey, I was a librarian, remember? The other book that I've used for sources tonight that I wanted you to know about is Winston Churchill, an intimate portrait. And this one's by Violet Bonham Carter. And she knew him from the time she was about 19. Her father was involved in politics too. And there would be friendships between the families. So she knew him as a friend, as a fellow politician for her father. And so her book has a lot of details and insights into the personality. And I think that would be one. If you enjoy The Splendid and the Vile, this one covers a much greater part of his life. Just be sure that I've got the right slide on so I don't tell you about the wrong thing. His father was Lord Randolph Henry Spencer Churchill. He's the youngest son of the Duke of Marlborough, Chancellor of the Exchequer at one point, House of Commons for the Conservative Party. He had a political career that was really taking off. Everybody knew that this man was going to end up as prime minister at some point. He was a really dynamic personality, but he had a few habits that caught up with him, and he died at a very young age. Was that a polite way of saying it? I thought so. His mother is Lady Churchill. I love this woman. And at some point in Winston's life, when he was visiting this country and speaking to, I think it was our Congress, he said, you know, if it had been my mother that was English and my father that was American, I might have been your president. And this woman was a very interesting woman. Her mother, she's from a wealthy family from New York. And you know, did any of you watch Downton Abbey? Okay, I don't have to explain a bunch of stuff then. You know that there was a period when those people in the noble families were having to marry Americans for money. And that's exactly what she was in England as a socialite to meet her husband-to-be. And it had to be somebody that had standing in the upper class. One of the things about this woman that I just love, she has tattoos. And at this point in time, that's not a really it's not a socially acceptable thing. So notice the scarf in the picture. Notice how carefully she's standing and holding the scarf. That's because the tattoo it's a snake tattooed around her wrist. Does that give you an idea that this was a really adventuresome, interesting woman? And of course, Winston's father's going to fall for her. She will have two boys, Winston and his younger brother, Spencer. Oh, did I mention when I was back there? Hold on a minute. I forgot to tell you. Notice he's Lord Randolph Henry Spencer Churchill. That Spencer is the same Spencer of Lady Diana's family. I just wanted you to know there was a connection. Now, I just love the courtship stories on these families. Lord Randolph Churchill married Jeannie Jerome April 15th, 1874, at the British Embassy in Paris. It was a whirlwind romance, and supposedly she was so head over heels in love, she married him the minute that he proposed. And 7 months later, they are at a party at Blenheim Palace. It's not their home, they're the guests at the party. And she's dancing and having a wonderful time. And Winston said, Mama, I'm ready. And that child was born on a table in the cloakroom during the party. I'm not making that up. You can't make some of this stuff up. Now, the thing that's really interesting, his mother and father are both very dynamic people. They just don't like kids. So they have two, but they don't do much of raising them. They hire nannies. And it's really amazing. This is a portrait of Miss Elizabeth Everest that's painted by Winston Churchill. It was one of his earlier paintings. This woman, and this is how he describes her. She was his nurse and confidant, his comforter, his strength, his stay, his one source of human understanding. And he and his brother stayed in contact with her and loved her all of her life. Excuse me. Now, I love this. Don't you just love that confident little boy? He's about 7 years old here. And the thing that I want you to think about that is not so much fun, this precious little 7-year-old's father thought he was a slow child. So he was looking for a boarding school to send him to that wouldn't be too demanding. And at age 8, I don't know how they sent their babies off at 8. At age 8, they will send him to St. George's School. It's a boarding school that has some very strict rules are not the word I want. Anytime you got out of line, you were flogged until you bled. It was brutal. So after a short time, they moved him to Harrods. And at those two schools, he passed, but he didn't really excel. He excels when he goes to Sandhurst. And he will finish the 12th in a class of 130 students. And he said the reason he did so good at Sandhurst because he was finally doing something that he loved and that he enjoyed. And as soon as he graduates from Sandhurst, he's going to join the 4th Queen's Hussars. And this is shortly after his father's death. So his father never sees or realizes that this is a special child, that he is bright, and that he does have a future, and he will make his parents proud. Of course, his father would never see that. Wait a minute, I think I went one too far. No, that was the one. Now, I've got to tell you, when he graduates and he joins the Hussars, he comes to a certain reality in a hurry. Number one, he is not going to inherit a great wealth. He's got to make his own way. And to do that, at that time, the best way was to be a hero in a battle. So he worked really hard to be assigned to places where there were really hot conflicts going on. The second thing he realized is, oh my goodness, you don't make enough in this army to pay for your supplies. It was like $150 was what he earned, and $600 and something was what it took to buy his uniforms, take care of his horse, and do the other things that were required. Being an officer was not a really good thing unless you had a source of income. And he is going to figure out that he is a good writer, and that's going to become his source of income. And the bit about the, oh, wait a minute, there. The part about being a hero, he finds, and he hadn't planned this, had gotten jobs as reporters for the newspapers. And when he would be in these conflict areas, he would write about what was happening, and they would publish it. So people began to see his name, and he began to have a reputation. But here he is in the Boer War in South Africa. He is not thinking that he's going to an assignment where he is going to be staying. He's just taking a train with the troops, and then he'll be going on to another assignment for the paper. The Boers attack the train, and all of the soldiers that are on the train are in great jeopardy. Now, some of them are injured right away. Churchill is the officer that takes control, and he gets them to load the injured back into the train, and they get the track unblocked, get the engine where it's returning, puts as many men as he can on it, and sends them back to safety. But he and the platoon that he's with, or the group he's with, are captured. And they don't realize what a valuable asset they have in Churchill. So he is in the prisoner of war camp, and he's made up his mind that he's got to escape because eventually they'll figure out who he is, and it won't be good. So he and a couple of other prisoners have this plan and how they're going to escape. But every time they tried to put it into action, the guards started paying attention. So one day they're out on the parade area where they can walk around, get some exercise every day, and he notices none of the guards are paying attention at all. They're not even in their regular places. So he escapes. Now, you got to think about this. He's by himself. He doesn't understand the language. He doesn't have a map. He's got a few bucks in his pocket, not much food, and he's facing a 300-mile journey through enemy territory. How do you do that when you can't even speak the language? Well, the way he did it was when he escaped, he got to a rail yard and he hid in a boxcar thinking that train would take him into an area where he would be safe. And of course, the minute that he escaped, they started looking for him and they put out bounties on him. I mean, it was a serious situation he was in. He stays on that train for a while, and after it gets dark one day, he gets off thinking that if he can find a mine engineer that would be a British subject, because this was one of the things that they were fighting this war over, was control of the mines. And at this point, the British, usually it was a British engineer that was the manager or the superintendent of the mine. And if he could find the house of a British engineer, he would be safe. And he finally sees one that he thinks looks promising, and he knocks on the door. And when the man opens the door, he nearly faints. He said, "You're really lucky you hit this door, because it's the only one for miles around where they wouldn't have turned you in for that reward." So then they had to figure out a way to get him out of that area, which was controlled by the Boer. And he kept him hid down in the dark mine for days until they could get it all set up. And they loaded the boxcar and left a little opening in between the different containers of the mining coal stuff. And they had food for him, and they had some money. And he was to stay there for 3 days. And after 3 days, when the train stopped, he could get off. And of course, to his amazement, when he was finally got to a safe place and got off the train, he was a hero. Cha-ching! One of the things he had to do, he had done. Now, this is the other thing that he had done. Remember, I told you he needed a source of income. He is being paid 250 British pounds a month for reporting from all of these different war locations and these battle locations. If you put that in today's dollars, that's about $10,000 a month. He was the highest paid correspondent. And I mean, he's reporting from all over the world. He's at Cuba, he's in India, Sudan, South Africa. And he realizes that, wait a minute, all these articles that I've been writing, if I take the information in them, I can put them in a book. And that'd even be better for income. So he started publishing books. And this one, Winston Churchill Reporting, tells about his adventure. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot to hit that. No. Oh, come on, be nice to me. There's the one I wanted. This one is the one that tells about his escape, and it's the one that people can't wait to get their hands on. So he is going to start a publishing career that will continue the rest of his life. Sometimes he's researching things to write biographies of people that are in the history of England. Other times he's writing from his own experiences, but he is constantly writing from this point on, and that helps finance his political career too. Now, he comes back from the Boer War. He's a hero because of being captured, and now he's going to start step 2. He's going to get involved in politics. He's going to follow in his footsteps, and he's sure he's going to have a great career. Well, he immediately runs into a problem, and the problem is he's single, and the other candidates are married. And it's funny how these women have influence over their husbands. So he's got to figure out a way to have a woman assist him in his campaigning. And you know, he calls this mother that had no time for him when he was a kid. And it even gets better than that. She's on her honeymoon. And the guy she married was born the year that Winston was born. I told you she was an interesting lady. But when he contacts her and tells her the situation and that he really needs to have her assistance, and so she interrupts her honeymoon and goes, and she's a dynamo. She knows a lot of the right people. She knows how to read the political scenery, and she is wonderful assistance for him. And when he is elected, she is going to be right there in the Houses of Parliament when he makes his first speech. Now, before he gets too far in his political career, he's going to take care of that shortage of a wife. And it's fascinating because he runs in to Clementine Hauser, and they had met before. They had been at a dinner party, and he's 10 years older than she is, so she was 19 the first time they met, and she thought he was a snob. He did not ask her to dance. What was wrong with the fool? So it's 10 years later, And they meet up again, and everything's totally different this time. Now, there are a couple of things that make her the perfect match for him at this point. One is she had a childhood similar to his. She had parents that had no time for children. Fortunately, she had a good nanny. There were all kinds of similarities in their childhood, but they both are very bright people, and together they make an incredibly strong couple. She is so good at reading people, and there are times when, even as prime minister, when he has people pushing him to take action in one direction, and she's saying, just look at the options before you follow what he's saying. And usually, when she was concerned about a situation, there was good reason for it. So he did respect her opinion on things. But they will get married, and she will become an incredible help for him. Now, we're almost to where the book starts. I thought you'd want to know that. At this point in world history, things are brewing in Germany. And the Prime Minister of England at this point is Chamberlain. And Chamberlain does not want another war. It hadn't been that long since the last war. And they're still recovering financially. And nobody believes Germany has the strength to raise this risk, because the peace settlement at the end of World War I was supposed to limit their military abilities and the materials that they could have. But here at this Munich agreement, Mussolini is on the far left, then Hitler, then an interpreter, then Chamberlain, and there would be a representative from France that is involved in this, but I couldn't find a picture with him. Must have been shy. But this is September 1938, and the thing Hitler says is, we are just so crowded in our country. We just need a little living room. And that living room just happens to be in the Sudetenland. And if you just let us have this little part here, we'd just be happy, everything would be great, and we wouldn't have to fight or anything. And they believed him and signed that agreement. This is that wonderful time when Chamberlain returns to England, and he's got the agreement, and you know what he said: there will be peace in our time. Chamberlain really believed that negotiation was the way to go, and his advisors thought that too. And the other thing was, they were not set up to fight another war. They did not have the manpower, they did not have the equipment, and they needed to work at peace that did not require that kind of infrastructure. Now, Lord Halifax is the Foreign Secretary under Chamberlain. And Lord Halifax agrees with Chamberlain that they must negotiate, that they must try to avoid a war. And it's interesting because Lord Halifax will become ambassador to the United States for 5 years while Churchill is prime minister. Now, this is hard to imagine. I wish I almost had a chalkboard so I could click off the dates, because this stuff comes so fast. And we've studied all of this, but I don't think I had a concept until I started reading Eric Larson's very detailed descriptions of how fast these things happened once Churchill became prime minister. When things went south with the Sudetenland Agreement, Chamberlain called an election, and he resigned as prime minister. Everybody thought he would put Halifax up for his replacement. But Halifax wasn't sure that he was the one that they needed at that point. He wasn't sure that he could bring the country together, and he had some health issues. And so he bowed out. And the next man that had the qualifications was Winston Churchill. So all of a sudden, in May of 1940, May 10th of 1940, Winston Churchill becomes prime minister, and Hitler invades France and the Low Countries. Same day. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Now, remember, we're talking May 10th, because it's getting interesting in a second here. Oh, I need to move that. Why did they choose Churchill? because he was so qualified for this position. He wasn't always the most popular politician, and he made decisions that made people angry, but he had been the First Lord of the Admiralty. Now, that would be our Secretary of the Navy. He had been Minister of Munitions. That would have been a similar Pentagon assignment. He had been Secretary of State for War. That would have been our Secretary of the Army. He would have been Minister of Air, our Secretary of the Air Force. Chancellor of the Exchequer. Chancellor of the Exchequer is like Secretary of the Treasury. And Minister of Defense. He had been involved in trying to prevent us from getting them into wars. Now, with this kind of experience, with these particular assignments over the recent past, he understood their military was not up to standards. He understood how much money they didn't have. He understood what the people would have to sacrifice to make this work. He was probably one of the few people in the government that had a firsthand knowledge of what the situation was. And now he's going to have to try to work it out. His first speech in Parliament, and remember I told you Chamberlain and Halifax wanted to negotiate, and they thought that Winston would listen to what they said. So he goes to Parliament, he gives his first speech in Parliament, and Halifax and Chamberlain are about to have strokes because Winston's not doing what they thought he was supposed to do. And here's what he said: I would say to the House, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Victory at all cost. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be, for without victory, there is no survival. Wait a minute, you're supposed to be negotiating. It didn't work that way. He felt strongly if they did not put up a determined front that Hitler would take advantage of them. And he also felt if he did not rally the British people around the situation, that it would be very difficult for them to maintain their freedom. Okay, remember he became prime minister on May 10th. This is May 26th. Have you ever heard of Dunkirk? I bet you have. It's one of those that is so hard to understand how they accomplished that salvation of all of those troops that were scattered there. And they're not all British. Some of them are French. Other allies are in those that are captured. But Churchill, I mean, he's 10 days into his prime ministership, and all of a sudden he's in a major crisis. If they cannot evacuate these soldiers that are stuck at Dunkirk, the war is lost right there. And the problem is there is no good dock there. There is no place for them to bring a big ship in that they can take out large numbers. And they're telling him that he needs to negotiate with Hitler to try to save the soldiers. And he's going, no, I don't think that will work. And he comes up with this idea and tells the Navy what he plans for them to do. And they all go, are you crazy? And he said, it'll work. Now, what they were going to do was get all of the British boats they could find. It could be pleasure crafts, yachts, fishing boats, anything that would cross the channel. The smaller boats ended up going to the beach in Dunkirk and ferrying the soldiers back to the bigger ships that couldn't come into the beach. So they are going to work very diligently to rescue as many as possible. Now, there's another problem here. All of the equipment that these troops had with them, they cannot rescue that. There's not any way that they can get them all out. He's hoping they could rescue 8,000, 9,000, 10 at the most. I need to move that one. Dynamo was the name of the project to get these men off of that beach. And I love the way British names name the different events. You know what Dynamo was? somebody asked one of the officers that was coordinating the rescue, and they said, well, what do we call this operation? And he's trying to think quick of what's the name, and he's got a fan sitting on his desk, and it's just blowing a little breeze, and the fan was manufactured by Dynamo. I told you I can't make this up. They are, between May 26th and June 4th, over 340,000 Allied troops are invaded. Let me say that again. 340,000 Allied troops are going to be rescued and brought back. And these are civilians that are taking their power boats over. There are some military boats, but the huge majority of the boats that are going to be working the rescue at Dunkirk are civilians. Do you know what it did for the morale of the British people that they could get together this operation and to separate or to rescue these men? After this happens, Churchill is going to go back to Parliament, and this is one of his very famous speeches. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. And all of Britain rejoiced and celebrated. Now look at the date on that. It's June 18th, 1940. Remember May 10th was when he became prime minister. That's an incredible, incredible success. Now, let's look at what happens immediately after Dunkirk. I mean, France is going to fall. Hitler is going to make his way through the Low Countries, Belgium, France, all of those so quickly that it becomes very clear to the British people that they may get invaded. And if they get invaded, they do not have the power, the equipment, the manpower to protect themselves. So they have got to try to keep Hitler from being able to get to the British. Now, the other thing that happened on this fall of France, at the end of World War I, when they signed the unconditional surrender, the Allies chose to have the German officers come to a train car that was parked off to the side, and they felt very humiliated that they were forced into this environment to sign away this unconditional surrender. So when France falls, Hitler gets that same train car and takes it to the same park and make sure that France understands this is retribution for their part in that First World War. Now, there's another problem. We've already lost all of this equipment at Dunkirk. When France falls, they have ships in their navy that the British had helped a man supply, and they've been working with the British Navy. These ships are valuable assets to Hitler. And so Churchill gave France 4 choices. You could bring those ships and join the British fleet. You could sail them to a British port. You could sail them to a French possession that was not under Hitler's control. Or you could go to America or the U.S. or scuttle the ships. France couldn't quite figure out what they needed to do. And so they did not take any of those options. And on July 3rd, 1940, in French Algeria, where these ships were all gathered, the British Navy attacked to keep those ships from going into Hitler's hands. Now, this was a decision that Churchill had to make that he knew his naval officers would not like. These are people that they knew. These are people they had fought with, had worked with. And now, because France has fallen, they are his enemy. On that day when that attack happened, 1 battleship was sunk, 5 others damaged, 1,297 French servicemen were killed. The British lost 5 aircraft, 2 crewmen. but England would now have to fight on alone. There was no buffer between them and Hitler. Okay, we're in a really bad situation, and we don't have anywhere near enough equipment to defend ourselves and to prevent Hitler from invading. So Churchill has got to find a way to get the necessary things made, the aircrafts, the boats, all of the things that they needed to defend themselves. And he goes to a friend, Lord Beaverbrook, who is an industrialist. He is good at making a profit. He is good at producing the things that he's trying to produce in his factories. When he put Lord Beaverbrook in charge of the aircraft production, in 7 weeks, it went from 45 available planes to over 1,000 available planes. Whoa. Hitler was not expecting that. And these are going to be the Spitfires that are really good against their planes. Well, how did they pay for them? They didn't have a thing in the budget that said war materials. They weren't expecting to have to build that fast. They paid for them because Lord Beaverbrook suggested to the public that they could be of use to them. If the children would gather up scrap metal, scrap wood, all of the things that they may need, that would help. And then he came up with another plan that was just brilliant. Everybody could buy a part of a plane. Now, if you wanted to get the whole school together and buy a whole wing, they'd put your school's name on the wing. And if you just wanted to buy a little part, that was okay too. But they got the British public involved in meeting this crisis. They took in about 13 million British pounds. If you're looking at that today, it'd be about 650 million. It was incredibly successful, and he's turning out the Spitfires very quickly. The Spitfires are going to be the most highly produced British aircraft, but also the most productive. And this is going to provide them with the air power to at least slow him down, Hitler down, in bombing the people. There it goes. The Spitfire was their favorite fighter. The Hawker Hurricane Bomber was the one that carried the big bombing loads. And the Messerschmitt, the Messerschmitt is going to be the German fighter that is going to be comparable to the Spitfire. And the Royal Air Force does an incredible job of getting men trained and getting them into the air to protect us. Now, the book does cover a lot about Winston and Franklin. And it's an interesting relationship. They had actually met at the end or toward the end of World War I. At that point, FDR was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and Churchill was involved in, I think munitions was the division that he was in. But they were in a number of meetings, but they don't either one remember meeting each other, or they certainly didn't get to know each other at that point. So they're going to have to build a relationship out of necessity. Now, let me set the stage for FDR. He's running for a third term. Part of his campaign promise is to keep him out of war. And he knows that the situation in England is really bad and that they do not have a lot of supplies and things. So one of the things that he will do is call us the Arsenal of Democracy and pass this Lend-Lease. And I love the way he described it. It's like if your neighbor's house was on fire and you had a garden hose, wouldn't you loan it to him to put the fire out? And that was in one of the fireside chats. Now, these two men both needed each other, and they are going to build a relationship over the war that will be very helpful. I'm going to skip through a few of these because I just want you to get an idea of what it's like in London at this time. He is going to have cabinet war rooms that are underground. He will have secretaries and all of the different staff people that he needs. They will often be living there. If you look over on the left side, you'll see bunk beds on the end of the row. If you look at, that one's a little darker than I thought it was, but that is the map room that you could see today if you went to the Imperial War Museum. That is where they were supposed to be keeping Franklin safe from the bombing. It didn't always work. Now, I noticed there is also the young women are working down there. These people sometimes are underground for weeks at a time before it's considered safe going up. Notice the young women have a bed in the corner. They don't, and their curtains they can pull out. They're not just at the end of the row in the hall. The Checkers is the state-owned. This is the British government house for the use of the Prime Minister. It's not Winston's house, but it's one that he is able to use. And it's only a 2-hour drive from Downing Street. So many times the whole cabinet will come out and they will have a couple of days that they are able to work together. But one of the problems with Checkers is if you look at the picture, they're not a heck of a lot of trees. So if there's a full moon, that's a really good target for the German planes. So he's going to have this friend's house, Ditchley Park, and they will use it about a dozen times because there are trees around it, and it's much harder to identify from the air. But these are the places that they would go to try to have a safe area to meet in. Except Winston would, if they were bombing in that area, he's liable to be on the roof watching them. And when they were in London and everybody's gone down to the war rooms, he's on the roof watching them. And I don't think, I had a hard time realizing just what the bombing impact was. From June to December 1940, there were 166 days of continuous bombing on England. 166. And that's all of England. But in London itself, there were 90 continuous days of raiding. That's hard to imagine. Night after night after night. How did they rally the people so that they would be able to continue their jobs, because a lot of them are in war work? It was amazing the different ways that, let me see, wait a minute, I went too far. I'll go back. There, can you see the children looking at the house? I wanted you to see that image because there's not another neighborhood they can move to. So these children are figuring out that, see, there's a room up there at the top that hadn't collapsed. We could be okay up there. But most of the time, the families are going to go into shelters because every day the streets are littered with debris. And I just want you to get a few images. The undergrounds become bomb shelters. Can you imagine 90 days in a row sleeping on the side of the subway station platform? This is why Winston was so important to the public image, because he stayed with them. He made himself visible. He encouraged them. And you'll see the different ways that they tried to be safe. And I love some of the shelters they came up with. This is an Anderson shelter that if you had a backyard, you could put it in, and it's all steel. And there's room to sleep 4 in there. But my favorite one is the Morrison shelter. Doesn't that look like a kitchen island? A clumsy one, but it's all steel. And if you're sleeping in that, it's got that mesh stuff around it, so flying glass isn't coming in. And if the house collapses, it'll hold you up. You'll have an air pocket there till they get you to rescue you. They were very, very creative. And the attitude of the British people. Here's the milkman. I don't bloody care if the Nazis bomb the neighborhood. I got milk to deliver, and by Jove, I intend to do it. And the women, they were so important. Keep calm and carry on. She's sitting on a pile of rubble drinking her tea. These people know that they have no choice, and their prime minister is setting an example. Mary Churchill is going to get involved. Now, she's only 19 when the war breaks out. She's very much a little social butterfly, but yet she's going to learn how to fire an anti-aircraft gun. She's going to become a commander. and she'll receive the MBE for Distinguished and Gallant Conduct for her work. Winston was very, very pleased with his daughter's work. He inspected the anti-aircraft batteries regularly. He wanted to thank those people that were fighting. And by the way, Mary Churchill had some easy duty, if you could call being at a park in London while it's being bombed easy. But then she ended up right on the front lines. She was in very heavy fighting. Here's Bletchley Park, another place where the women were contributing. And they're going to be ones that break that Enigma code that give the British all of the information they need, or a lot of it. But one of the problems with that, and, oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had a different slide there. Elizabeth Leighton is going to be Churchill's secretary from 41 to 45. It was critical that he had people around him that understood the needs and she, of course, would write a book. The last thing she did for him was take dictation of the Victory in Europe Day speech. The other person that was critical to his personal life and his being able to keep up the pace was Detective Inspector Walter Thompson. He had been his bodyguard in 1921 to 1935, and he'd retired. And then when they realized the risk that Churchill was under as prime minister, he came out of retirement, stayed with him. You'll see his picture in almost any group picture of Churchill. But the thing that Bletchley Park that I wanted to tell you about was they broke the code and heard that there was a major raid coming, and it was going to be over 5 cities. And they thought it was going to be London, Greater London, Kent. There were 5, but they did not say Coventry. And so they didn't warn the people of Coventry, and they were bombed heavily. Churchill had been in London on a roof waiting for the planes to come, and they didn't. They went to Coventry. But I chose this one. Number one, he is immediately there as the comforter in chief, but he's also trying to figure out what went wrong, how did they not know. But I want you to get an idea of how that felt when they were bombing. There were 300 German bombers. They dropped 500 tons of explosives, 33,000 incendiary bombs, and dozens of parachute mines. During the raid, 507 civilians were killed and 420 seriously injured. This was a real low point for Churchill because they had got to find a way to slow down the British. He will continue to try to be out to encourage people after every raid. Now let's get back to Roosevelt and Churchill. Over the years, they've just developed a real respect for each other. They've worked together. They know that they need each other's assistance for both of them to be successful. But you know, sometimes when you have a really good friend, you will forget and say things. And Churchill was overheard to say, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they tried everything else. So he was a realist. The VE Day is going to be an amazing time for Churchill. And I've skipped ahead now. We're out of the book. The book only covers 1 year. We've skipped a little bit. But on VE Day, the king and the queen and the 2 princesses come out on the balcony, and they're cheering, and people are excited, and they're jumping up and down. And then the king reaches back and waves Winston out. Oh, my goodness. The crowd went crazy. It was 10 times the volume. They all recognized that their cheerleader, their encourager, their savior, as far as that battle or those battles, it was his stamina, his determination that made it possible. Hitler never succeeded in invading England. They took a lot of damage from the bombing, and it was relentless, but they kept him off of that island. And the British people are going to remember that for a very short time. By the way, Germany, again, had to unconditionally surrender its armed forces. When Churchill was on the balcony with the king, he was encouraging the people still. And he says to them, my dear friends, this is your hour. This isn't a victory of any party or of any class. It's a victory of the great British nation as a whole. And the numbers out in the street cheering, excited. As soon as things settle down, he's going to retire to Chartwell, Churchill's country home. By the way, there was just a little election that he lost. And he is absolutely, totally depressed that he's lost this election. What do I do now? He was just wanting to start building back the country. And Clementine, bless her heart, she couldn't stand him just constantly. He was not good to live with at that point. And so she digs out his paint supplies. His nanny had taught him to paint, and many times it would be a release or a refuge for him. So he's going to start painting, and in the election of 1951, they're going to return him to 10 Downing Street for another 4.5 years. But before they get to that one, he becomes very successful as a painter. Now, he doesn't sign the paintings Churchill. He wants people buying his paintings because they're good, not because they're his. Of course, later they found out who painted them, and they really had a good buy. But I don't know if you know about the Wendy Reeves exhibit at the Dallas Museum of Fine Arts, but Wendy and Emery Reeves were friends of Churchill's, and Mr. Reeves was his publisher. So there would be times before that election that returned him to 10 Downing Street that he would spend months at the Reeves home. And there are some of these items are exhibited at the museum, the Dallas Museum now. And they also have some of his painting and letters to him. But with Mr. Reeves being his publisher, he spent a lot of time there because he was already starting to write books about World War II. Now, Mrs. Churchill, Clementine, this is them and their daughters right after she had been made Dame of the British Empire. Daughter Mary is on the left and Sarah's on the right. Do you recognize Sarah? If you've ever seen Fred Astaire in the movie Royal Wedding, that was his dancing partner. Sarah wanted to be an actress. Worked for a while, but that was one of the things she wanted to do. This is one of the paintings that is in the Dallas Museum of Art, and that is a view from the Reeves home in Italy. Winston's a fascinating person. I've got 4 minutes left. I had to cut out so much stuff because you can't cover it all in one book. That's why Mr. Larson chose to cover only 1 year. I'll tell you, there's a lot of scandals in there with his family. His daughter-in-law had an affair with Averil Harriman. She married him 30 years later when his first wife finally died. There's a lot of stuff left in the book that I haven't told you about, so I encourage you, check it out. Eric Larson does an incredible job of opening up doors into areas that you hadn't thought about in relation to the person or the situation that it's in. So I hope that I found some things you enjoyed learning about Winston today, and I hope you'll find a book about him and continue reading. Thank you so much.
Mary, it's off. Now we're on.
Yes.
Mary, thank you. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Fascinating. I think we've had such a great 5 weeks so far. All have been as good as they could be. I want to go out and get this book myself.
You'll love it.
So we will see you soon, and we'll see you all next week for Kathleen Kent. And once again, I'll remind you, if you have a book, bring it, and she'll sign it. So have a great week, everybody.